the Cedar Rapids Gazette came out with an article, as you know, Mark, that the headline was basically that Kirk Ferentz was dissolving this diversity committee, which, if anybody doesn't know, that Inclusion Diversity Committee had been put in place after the offseason controversy last summer. And it was made up of former players, African-American players, that were going to be giving advice to Kirk Ferentz and the staff and helping the university, because there were some issues. I mean, anybody who denies there weren't some issues is probably just too much of a homer. And there were issues. I understand that some people felt like Chris Doyle was made to be the scapegoat. I understand where they're coming from on that. I also understand people who say that maybe more was made out of it than should have been. But when you have as many players come forward as Iowa did, it's something that obviously needs to be taken seriously. So I don't want to sound like I'm downplaying it. The fact of the matter is, the Gazette article did specify in the article, if you read the article, that Kirk Ferentz was going to be looking at how to proceed with this committee moving forward. The problem is when you put a headline out there, and Mark, you've worked the media before, you've been a formal part of the media. When you put a headline out there, and there's a fine line between wanting clicks and putting an article headline that's going to generate clicks and generate interest, and being misleading with your headline. And I think that's where people are upset right now. They feel like they were misled because nothing was mentioned in the Gazette headline about the fact that Kirk Ferentz did state in his email to the committee that although the committee was being dissolved as it currently stood, it wasn't going to be dissolved permanently. And Kirk was planning on, according to the email, he is planning on revamping it with different different members. And I want to say this too: the Des Moines Register did release an article, or actually just a copy of an email that was sent out to players yesterday and their parents that basically stated Kirk Ferentz basically saying that there has been a lot of misinformation out there, but the reason why a number of these media members were relieved of their duties is because they were asked to be relieved of their duties. And so it had to be revamped. Now, I will say this. I'm not trying to stick up for anybody here, but by Kirk Ferentz using the word dissolved in his initial email to the committee, that's asking for trouble, right? Can we agree with that, Mark? Just by using that term, I'm not saying he deserves for this ended up being a huge story on ESPN.com, because it was, but that's probably not the word you want to use, and the Gazette ran with it.
I believe both can be true, that he could have phrased it more in a way that it would not lead to misrepresenting what he's about to do, but also the Register was not forthright in its reporting. The Gazette. I'm sorry.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's clear. And then again, there was nothing I want to make this clear. There was nothing in the Gazette article that I looked at and said that's just vehemently false. But the problem is, again, people, there is that fine line between making something appealing for someone to click on and read and making it what we'd call clickbait. And certainly when you're dealing with a very sensitive issue like race relations, Mark, I think that line has to be is that much more important to respect. So perhaps that was, I'm not attacking anybody, but perhaps that line was sort of treaded on a bit.
Do you believe that Ferentz sends out those type of communications without them being filtered or reviewed by anyone?
That's a good question. I mean, he's the head football coach. This is not the initial email, I believe, was sent out to the advisory committee, which isn't made up of more than, I want to say, like 30 people. Maybe it's not even that big. Maybe that's way too big. I don't know, but it's not a lot of people. So I wouldn't necessarily think, especially given the fact that these are former players, that Kirk, he probably doesn't do that. The disappointing thing too is, and I know the Gazette reported on this, but David Porter, former Iowa offensive lineman who was the committee chair at the time, has been very outspoken against Ferentz in the last few days. And that's unfortunate because David Porter was a good offensive lineman for Iowa. Again, he was the committee chair. I think he was respected heading into this, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve respect now, but it did come out that he had sent out a text message to his fellow committee members following the Citrus Bowl, and said in the text that he believed Kirk Ferentz and Brian Ferentz needed to be fired or needed to retire. I should say, let me rephrase that. That Kirk Ferentz needed to retire and that Brian Ferentz needed to be let go. And he did state on the radio yesterday, AM station KCJJ in Eastern Iowa, he did state that he felt like Kirk would be willing to fall on his own sword for Brian Ferentz, and for that reason, he didn't feel like Iowa could go forward. It wasn't a comment based on football performance; it was a comment based on the offseason and the inclusion issues that we're talking about. So that's unfortunate too. That's been a part of all of this.
I think it also needs to be considered that actions speak louder than words, and the initial controversy that came to light in the summer of 2020, correct?
Right.
Okay, so here we are, more than a year and a half later, and we've got a transfer portal where student athletes are jumping into the transfer portal for all sorts of reasons, both good and bad, or good and flimsy, I should say. And there's not been a huge departure of athletes from the Iowa football team. So I think that's to Kirk's credit, and may, in a sense, not confirm what Mr. Long is demanding.
Well, here is the biggest issue I have with the and again, this was all
Porter. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this was all started by Porter, and let's just be clear that the one issue I have with Porter, and especially with what he said on the radio yesterday, was that he was asked, had Iowa been following the committee's suggestions on how to make black student athletes feel more comfortable? And the answer was yes, they had been doing that. So I don't know if, it did sound like potentially sour grapes, because the claim from Porter was made that Kirk Ferentz and the staff did not want to meet with the advisory committee during the bye week because, according to Porter, Ferentz wanted to push it off till December so that these coaches could have time with their families during the bye week. I understand both sides of it. I understand Porter, who says, no, this is important enough. We need to do this now. We're not waiting 2 months. This is important. I understand Kirk also thinking, okay, it's important, but we need to get our staff members time with their family. That's also important. So I understand there's two sides of this. But if that's, again, we don't know what's going on. We don't know all the details here, what's been going on behind closed doors between the committee and between Kirk Ferentz and the rest of the coaching staff. But if that's the reason why Porter is calling for Kirk to be fired, that's inappropriate, in my opinion. That's inappropriate. Unless there's a bunch of allegations that we're not aware of, that's inappropriate for him to come out and say, oh, it has nothing to do with the offense. Or because, I mean, you and Mark, I've been critical of Kirk Ferentz in this offense, but have you ever heard me say that Kirk Ferentz needs to be fired or needs to retire right now? I've never said that.
And exactly what you just stated was the exact statement that I was going to make about if that in and of itself caused Porter to make that demand, then yes, that's ridiculous.
So again, don't know if that's the case or not, but I will say this: the bottom line is it's bad optics for Iowa. I heard somebody rip me on social media on Sunday. Oh, you tweeted that far too soon. You got to hear both sides. I don't care what the sides are. It's unfortunate because it's bad optics for Kirk Ferentz because of the fact that now it's in the national media. It's on ESPN.com. It doesn't look good, whether it's rightful or not.
That person is probably not understanding of what optics means.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I said.
They're trying to make a distinction between they're trying to say, you haven't vetted this out to understand the story. No, it had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with what are the optics, sight. What does this look like to
Correct.
the average person out there? It's not a positive.
And let's be clear, the advisory committee's job, and Porter, Porter is one member of the advisory committee. Okay, so he's one member, and I understand when he came forward and this information was leaked, and he's talking with KCJJ. I happen to know, and this isn't a secret, Jordan Lomax being one. Some of these advisory members were not happy that Porter came out and said these things, and Jordan Lomax, who was a black safety who played under Kirk Ferentz in the past 6 to 7 years, came out in social media and ripped at least one Iowa member and said, you should have spoken to us as other committee members before publishing this stuff, because we don't agree with what David had to say about Kirk Ferentz needing to step down. We don't agree with that. Now, again, they're going to go unnamed, but some of these other media members claimed that they had tried to reach out to these committee members and they had refused to talk to them. So some of it's he said, she said. The bottom line is, like you just got done saying, Mark, it doesn't look good from the outside. ESPN publishes an article that was very similar in headline to what the Gazette published. And I didn't even look at it. I don't know if it was the Associated Press, if it was the
That's
AP,
where I saw it.
Okay, so that's what it is.
That's where I saw the story. Yeah.
So it's everywhere. And I think we can be clear that the Associated Press is not going to come out and retract what they published, because technically what they wrote was true, because Ferentz is the one that used the word dissolve. But the problem is the headline is misleading. And, but you're right. You said it at the outset. Kirk does have a responsibility now to make sure that this committee gets rebuilt, and he does it promptly, because it is an important issue. Anybody that says that making everybody feel comfortable at Iowa isn't important, then I don't know what to say to you, because it is important that everybody feel like they're part of a family and part of a team. They feel comfortable there.
I just pulled up the story that I first saw in reviewing, as I typically do a number of times during the day, to make sure I'm not missing any college football news. And I see this story on the ESPN college football front page. And so this story broke on the 15th, which would have been Saturday, correct?
I saw it Sunday. I think it was Sunday morning. I saw it Sunday morning.
Okay. This is dated the 16th. I'm sorry. So this is dated the 16th, because I just wanted to make sure that this is the first ESPN article. So ESPN even deviated from the term that Kirk Ferentz used, dissolved, and the title reads, Kirk Ferentz disbands diversity group, says decision unrelated to leader's suggestion to move on from Iowa coach.
Now, does it say later in the article? Because I'm assuming, so ESPN creates their own headline and then copies the AP article, correct? Is that what they did on this?
I believe so. Let's see.
So, but again, if I think I did see that they do acknowledge in the article that he is planning on.
Absolutely, they did.
Right.
Yes, because this is where I got all of my information, and they make that clear.
Yeah.
Again, unfortunately for Kirk, he should have known that. You hear the word dissolve. What does dissolve mean? If you dissolve something, it's no longer exists. It's.
With that being said, though, Mark, you're right. Maybe that was a poor choice of words on the part of Kirk Ferentz. That doesn't absolve media from being forthright and not being deceptive with a headline. That to me, that is, and I haven't worked in that capacity before. We help operate a local news site here in Ames. I've worked AM, FM radio. I've not ever worked at that capacity with that big of a voice. So I'm not acknowledging that, but there is some sort of honor that has to be associated with being a media member at whatever capacity. And you have to understand that, again, with a sensitive issue especially, that line that is there, and it's a fine line, it has to be respected. And I think perhaps it wasn't. And so people are very defensive of Kirk Ferentz, and I understand where they're coming from. People who are mad at the Gazette for allowing this to be published, believing that certain reporters have a vendetta against Kirk Ferentz. I'm not going to go that far because I don't know these people personally, but certainly it looks like it's to generate clicks, and that's not a good look for the Gazette.
Yeah, in my view, there's no question that the weight of the issue lies on the media far more than it does Kirk Ferentz. He could have stated it differently, but even in the way in which it's stated, it's easy to see, read, and understand that the plan is to ultimately restructure it. What timetable, I don't know, but end the committee as it currently is constructed and reconstructed and revamp it and continue on with it. Now, I know that if I was in the Iowa athletic department, and certainly the administration going on up beyond that, I would be having a meeting, and I'm sure they already have, with Kirk to say, let's get moving on this restructuring. And so if we can show that we're good to our word and we are going to restructure this committee, then all should be well. And of course, we know better than that. The damage has been done to a certain extent, but at least we can move on and show that we are good for our word.
But I will say this, Mark, you brought it up earlier in the show already, but the fact of the matter is Iowa has not had some big exit of black players. Even during the controversy in 2020, Iowa had one decommit, okay? Jordan Olatakun, who I don't even know where he ended up. I think maybe he's at an FBS school, I think. But the reports from, and now you can make the argument that the current players won't feel comfortable really being honest until they leave because, pushback. I get that. I'm not claiming they would ever happen, but you could understand that argument. But the bottom line is Porter, the committee chair, who outwardly has said now that he wants Kirk Ferentz gone, he wants Brian Ferentz gone, he wants the staff overturned. He even admitted that the coaching staff and Kirk had implemented the suggestions of the committee. That's been done. The current players have endorsed a cultural change. Not to say it's done, not to say that there's not work to be done, because there clearly is. I don't think you ever stop working at an issue like this, because it is an issue that clearly we have in this world, and we can only do so much individually, but it needs to be worked at. So those things have been done. It's been those are on the record of having been done. So my one big thing here, and this would be the only criticism I have right now for anybody on the athletic staff, and that would be Gary Barta, because, and I'm not saying that Gary is responsible for all of this. I'm not trying to imply that, but it just seems like this kind of thing happens a lot, Mark. The lack of PR awareness. You'll recall several years ago, if you're an Iowa fan, a Fran McCaffrey extension that was signed during the middle of a really bad season, one of Fran's two worst seasons of his tenure here. That didn't make much sense. You have the field hockey controversy. I don't know if you remember that story, Mark, but boy, was that 10 years ago or better? With and lawsuits out the wazoo. The lawsuit associated with the field hockey coach that was let go for what she claimed was discrimination, and of course won the lawsuit. Of course, there was controversy as to whether it was a mistake on Gary Barta's part not recording some of what he believed was evidence to terminate her. But there's just all these different things that it just doesn't seem like. And now, of course, the university is facing a different lawsuit as it relates to some of the claims during 2020. I just don't understand why we can't seem to get our PR skills down pat. And everybody tells me Gary Barta is a tremendous fundraiser. Well, to announce the extension for Kirk Ferentz, and for the record, Kirk, in his email to the advisory committee, I believe it was in the email, I know it was reported that he had made this change, made the decision. The decision had been made by Kirk, maybe not announced yet, but it was made by Kirk in November to revamp the committee. But that was reported that it was made in December. You would think that Gary Barta would be aware of that, wouldn't you, Mark? Wouldn't Gary Barta be aware of that by January? That the committee, the committee that was made because of all the issues a year and a half ago was being revamped? I would think he'd be aware of that. So you would think that we would be able to time if you're planning on extending your coach till 29, you'd think you'd be able to make that announcement at a proper time, at the proper time, not like 4 or 5 days before this. I mean, again, I understand the Gazette had this story for probably about a week, but it just seems like this kind of PR debacle happens over and over and over again. And I have some sympathy for Kirk Ferentz in all this, because I don't think it was fair on his part that he's being perceived this way. Again, I'm not there within the program. I have no idea the extent of the issues that still need to be resolved. But just going by the evidence we have, which are the email to the committee initially to disband, or to not to disband, but to revamp, and then the email to the parents, which was sent out by Kirk Ferentz this week, and then, of course, the media follow-up. I do have some sympathy for Kirk Ferentz in all this.
I do as well. It underlines how important it is to message correctly. Yes, he could have done a better job. However, he should not have to endure the type of public scrutiny and media irresponsibility based on not using the best of words. But still, let's not, at least in my reading of the statement, let's not mistake that with, even though it could have been stated more effectively, it was still clear what he stated.
Yeah, and again, I want to just make this clear. Had Kirk Ferentz actually dissolved the committee, that would have been a very bad move. And not just from an outside perspective. That's a bad move when you have issues that have been brought to your attention that need to be solved. I know that's like the third time I've said that in the past half hour, but the issues were apparent. There were black players that were complaining about this in 2020, and those issues again. I know some have made the claim that the lawsuit that's facing the university is based upon a money grab, and a lot of them are players that I think all of them are players that never made it at the next level. I understand that perspective. You can have that, but there are players that brought it up that were in the NFL and succeeding. So it's an issue that I'm not questioning needed to be addressed and continues need to be addressed, but that doesn't mean that you just throw anything out there to make Kirk Ferentz look bad if he's making steps in the right direction. It's just unfortunate, and I hate seeing the divisiveness on Twitter because it's just what a waste of time and energy it's all about semantics. This has all come down to semantics. That's what I tweeted about yesterday. It's just and yet it's become an absolute firestorm. People making hateful comments towards other people, and it's just unfortunate. I know we probably want to talk about other stuff, Mark, but do you have anything to add to this before we move on?
Well, just basically to outline what you just stated, which I'm completely on board with and support 100%, that we have a situation where there were issues. To what degree, we don't know, but to your point, valid issues amongst a number of players, past and present. Those concerns, I don't want to say were addressed, but there was a response to it to start addressing those issues, to put something in place, to hear and to respond and to take action. And then we have a coach who makes a decision based on needing time for his staff and their families, and still continues to be, by all accounts, committed to developing this committee, just wants to restructure it. And so we have, because of that, and then attacks made and misinformation, miscommunication, and representation of what happened, people then needlessly and probably in most cases ignorantly attacking each other and attacking him. And
and I will say this, something I left out too is that one of Porter's claims was that a simple question had been presented to the coaching staff. In summary, basically, how are you helping the athletic department be more diverse and inclusive? And Kirk Ferentz had come to that meeting with an answer to the question. Others did not, and that upset Porter. And I understand that. If it was one question about a very serious issue, you're telling me you can't come up with an answer. And I'm not denouncing the fact that Porter was upset that Ferentz wanted to push it back till December. That's his right. He feels like it was an important issue, which it is. Perhaps that supersedes. I mean, how hard is it to have a Zoom meeting for 30 minutes, Mark, during a bye week? So I understand that perspective of it. I don't have a problem with that. But as we've stated before, to generalize it and say that he needs to be relieved of his duties and all, did Kirk Ferentz have a choice at that point, Mark? As this diversity committee is here to help the university, help Kirk Ferentz, and he even said that in his letter to the parents this week. The committee is there to help Kirk Ferentz to be a better person and to help the program, help the student athletes feel more comfortable. And Porter, I think you can argue he probably went a little bit too far by saying that the only pathway forward is to relieve Kirk of his duties. How do you continue with Porter as the chair, Mark, when you're when he wants you and your son gone? I mean, I don't know how you can continue.
We're in a culture of reading headlines, and we'll never know how many people that are involved in this from a periphery standpoint that are arguing about it only read headlines. Because I got to say, my response to this was, I read the headline. It was already in my mind. What is he doing? Why would he do that? Because when it comes to social matters in particular and others, I have kind of two thoughts about it. One is that there is generally, not in all cases, but there hopefully is the motivation and the incentive to do the right thing because it's the right thing, because you care about people and you want to do the right thing and you want fairness and justice and all those things. But even if you have an underlying reason that you don't care, you're not a caring person, but you have the incentive of self-preservation and your own business, your own career, whatever the case might be. And so you do the right thing for business reasons. And so I even thought, why is he doing this? Even if his heart's not in it, he's got to know this is a stupid thing to do. Well, I hadn't read the article yet. I was going by the headline that he disbanded this committee. And who knows how many people, because we know people in this day and age especially are lazy and just read headlines, and that's where they are on this.
And I just want to say this, and to be very clear, this is it's an old guy on Twitter that made this comment, but this is proof that anybody who wants to say that there aren't people out there who are not probably don't have the right viewpoint in life on a lot of things. This is proof of that. So after this news broke, this guy on Twitter, he says, "I will be blunt. This is all blank. Iowa boosters don't give a blank that a diversity committee even exists. If you don't believe me, ask the booster clubs via secret ballot. If one thinks racism is bad in Iowa City, then the players should go to school in Clemson or Athens." That type of attitude is still present with some people. Yeah. So you can't act like, well, there aren't people out there who, I'm not going to call this guy racist or whatever, but you can't act like everybody's inclusive. It's an issue that obviously needs to be addressed. But based on, to summarize all of this, Mark, based upon Kirk Ferentz's recent actions, there are no recent actions by Kirk Ferentz that would tell me that he is not taking the issue seriously. So I don't even know why it really has to be a huge headline. But unfortunately, like you brought out, it was, because I think it was a poor choice in words.